Welcome to another episode of Off the Menu. I'm Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, here with Charles Coulombe.
Here again.
We have a loaded episode for you today.
Filled with loaded questions, I'm sure.
Loaded questions. We have questions ranging from Malachi Martin, the letter to Pope Francis, the alt-right movement, and Nosferatu.
Oh, boy. You know, Nosferatu, contrary to the rumor, Nosferatu has not been tapped to go into the Trump cabinet. Just so.
Oh, good. Yeah.
That'd be reassuring.
Yeah. Let's start with the big news. Letter to Pope Francis from the Four Cardinals. Jonathan Bennett asked, what do you think of the intervention letter from the Four Cardinals to Pope Francis and of Cardinal Burke's remarks that this could lead to a formal correction against the Pope? Is this a sign of impending schism within the Church?
That is a loaded question. Well, I think everything's wonderful. No. Well, let's say several things about several things. Okay. Firstly, because most of us don't know any church history, we don't realize that the church has always had, at different times, horrors and problems and difficulties of this kind. When Pope John the 22nd denied that the just will see God at the immediate judgment, that is to say, when you die, and imprisoned a friar who disagreed with him. That was a terrible thing, and the people who lived at that time were not what you would call ultra happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to be fair to everybody concerned, John the 22nd renounced his heresy on his deathbed, and that friar he tossed into prison ended up as a bishop. So, so one of the few times that good deeds were rewarded in this life. The other thing you've got to bear in mind, too, is that this is a drama that's certainly been playing out as long as I've been around. Because the same foggy, nothing means anything, nothing specific, that the Four Cardinals are trying to cut through, is what has characterized Catholic life my entire adult life. It's just that what we're used to hearing from the pulpit, and what we're used to hearing from bishops when I was younger, and we don't hear that much anymore. We now hear from the highest authority. But if you think about it, generationally, that had to happen. I mean, it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So they're insisting on clarity from a member of a generation that really have a hard time delivering clarity. They don't think in those terms, you see. They don't think about what things mean specifically. And they're very annoyed at being tacked down to anything specific. I mean, if you ask your parents, if you haven't had this experience yourself, how many times would one say to a priest after a very confusing sermon, what exactly does that mean, Father? Where does that come from? And the most you get is having the guy explode at you. But in terms of justifying it, this goes back to what Benedict XVI called the hermeneutic of rupture versus the hermeneutic of continuity. The hermeneutic of rupture tells us it's a whole new world, nothing means anything, we're all free of coherence, which is a beautiful thing to be free of, believe me. I hate coherence myself. It's haunted me my entire life. I've had to live up to it, and I hate it. So let me say I sympathize completely with where that generation of clerics is coming from. I understand. You know, Woodstock, yeah, I'm there. Unfortunately, we do live in the real world, which is something that has always seemed to evade the clergy of that generation. So the dubia that have been presented, the questions, are very specific, and they require very specific yes or no answers. The problem is the cleric of the Holy Father's generation is not comfortable giving yes or no answers, and doesn't very often even think in that way, in those categories. I mean, an answer to that he might give, and again, it will never be an official answer, I'm sure. We say, oh, you want a black or white answer? Well, yeah. But see, the implication is that even wanting a specific answer shows how bad you are. The fact that you would think in that way shows how retrograde you are. Believe me, this is a road that many of us have been down all our lives. It just is kind of amusing to see it on the world stage and see it pulled on people who are much more qualified than you or me to make a proper response.
Okay.
And that's the problem. If the Holy Father wants to answer, for instance, one of the questions is, are there acts that are always intrinsically evil?
Pretty
Yes or no?
straightforward. Pretty straightforward.
It is. But see, Catholic moral teaching, as long as there's been Catholic moral teaching, is that, yeah, there are. There are things that you can never justify. Now, if the Holy Father says yes, then a lot of what's going out in his name, whether or not it's really from him, falls by the wayside. But if he says no, then he's contradicting 2,000 years of teaching and say, oh, by the way, you've got to believe me because I'm wonderful, or I know what I'm doing, or I'm Pope, and all the other popes are wrong. And that neither one of those are really answers he'll want to give. So I suspect, as again is very typical of that generation in action, rather than answering the question, one way or the other, opprobrium will be heaped upon the questioners. The problem is that these are very simple questions.
Yep.
You see, this is the crisis of that kind of tactic that, as I say, Catholics have been subjected to for the past 5 or 6 decades. We have had this, and again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I mean, growing up in Catholic schools, dealing with Catholic priests, it was the same bloody thing. It's just that now, instead of being some mere layman who could be thrown aside without answering, these are 4 cardinals of the church. And they're very learned men.
Yeah.
Perhaps even more learned than other people who should be better learned than they are.
Okay, so it seems like what you're getting at is, so there's not going to be a schism because he's not going to answer.
I doubt it. I doubt it highly. I mean, I've left the tarot cards at home. There's fog in my crystal ball. But I think that I doubt very highly there would be a schism. Because what would it be based on? Age? Because that's what it would be. It would be a generational thing. The gerontocracy saying, we're declaring war on the future. Well, okay, Holy Father, that's great. I'll see you in 10 years if you're still alive. And that kind of a schism, no, I don't think so.
Okay. Austin sent in a question. I recently listened to an old episode of Art Bell's radio show where he interviewed Malachi Martin. It was very entertaining, and Martin sounded like he had seen things no one ought to see. I was surprised when he said that Satan and Lucifer were separate demonic entities. He said that Lucifer was the original rebellious angel, and Satan was merely a lackey used by him to orchestrate the fall. Is there any truth to this claim, and if so, why are people so ignorant of this?
Well, frankly, I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
Makes him sound like Morgoth and Sauron.
Yeah.
But you got to understand that Malachi was a very good friend of mine, and a very, very decent individual, I must say. He was also a storyteller, and everything he said, let's put it this way, not everything he said might have been factually true, but it always had a point. I honestly can't give a real answer to that any more than I can for a lot of other things he said that people have asked me about.
Okay, well, Malachi Martin's a novelist.
He is a novelist.
Among other things, and one of the books we have in our house is Windswept House. And that is a novel of some notoriety because it talks about archbishops, cardinals doing satanic rituals in the Vatican. And Martin is saying that he's quoted as saying 95% of events in this book are real, and 85% of the characters are real people. Now, do you personally think he's being metaphorical with the satanic ritual in the Vatican, or do you believe him?
Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously I would have to be in a different position in life than I am to know for sure. But let's put it this way. There's always been Satanism in Rome. Always. Of course, there's Satanism everywhere. We ourselves are kind of satanic whenever we sin. But in terms of worshiping the dark angel, that has always existed in Rome. There was a very famous case in the 19th century when they were doing repair work at the Villa Borghese. They found a secret chamber some centuries old, filled with the implements of satanic worship. Well,
Wow.
the Villa Borghese, of course, belonged to a great noble family. Now, they were not Satanists as a rule,
Yeah.
but a member of the family, a servant, somebody who rented that section, because the great Roman families did rent out portions of their palaces to people. And cardinals, higher clerics, they're capable of all kinds of things because they're like human beings and stuff.
Oh, okay.
I know. But honestly, anything you can imagine any human being doing for good or for ill, a cardinal can do.
Wow.
Now, there's, to take it away from Rome, I mean, there is more than a small amount of suspicion that while some of the wave of pedophilia the church endured over the past several decades was, shall we say, recreationally induced, some of it was ritual, because the profanation of innocence is something that Satan delights in, and something that his servants delight in. It's one reason why Satan is not a nice person. You know, we tend to forget that. We tend to forget. He's really evil. He's really horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no defending him. Think of the most indefensible stuff you ever dealt with in your life. I mean, just, whether it was you or somebody else doing it. My gosh, it was horrible. Well, the father of lies. He is unique in our experience in that, unlike almost every human being you can name, there's no redeeming features there.
Next question. Michael Glanville wrote in and said, concerning the California state government's desire to squeeze as much money from property owners, do you think that this is intentional, meaning that they know that these upper class folks will leave and take their money with them, and that this is what they want in order to change the demographics of the state?
I can't really think so, partly because the number of wealthy people in this state, the percentage is so small, it really would not change demographics that much. The loss of the middle class will, but the very wealthy, no. Also, I mean, I find it very hard to believe that they'll want to shoot the geese that lay the golden eggs for the purpose of shooting the geese that lay the golden eggs. No, I think the fact is that the leadership of this state is very stupid. They're very unrealistic. I mean, I don't know how to put this, but haven't you noticed that our society today is kind of in fantasy land? Nothing's real. Well, a society tends to reflect its leadership. Our leadership are floating in the ether somewhere. They're very stupid people, and I mean that in a nice way. Part of the problem is ours, in the sense that what passes for our brightest and our best always have their sights set on Washington, D.C., not the State House. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean what we've got in D.C. is any better.
Yeah.
All it means is that it's better than what we'll get going to the State House.
Mm-hmm.
That's really
nobody dreams of one day being a state legislator or state senator.
Well, nobody with any ability, and that's sad. That's really sad. We should honestly, our brightest and our best should be willing to say, the height of my ambition is to be an assemblyman in Sacramento. Even the height of my ambition is to be a city councilman here in Slackjaw. Because those are the people that we need to do the job, not morons and idiots. We have what I call the tyranny of the involved. That is to say, those people who bother showing up. You go to your average city council meeting, who shows? Who really follows what's going on in Sacramento? I mean, I give you. I cited this a couple episodes ago, but I mean, I need to bring this back for people to think about. We just passed a proposition in the election before last that was revolutionary. It allows a majority of state assemblymen to remove one of their number without reference to his constituents. That's horrible. And nobody said boo. Not the state Republican Party, not the state Democratic Party. And nobody cares. I don't care. But don't be surprised when you notice there's nothing in your pockets and your wallets are empty. Don't you be upset then. You know. So, no, I don't think that they're putting it, that they really have a plan other than absorbing as much dough as possible and spending it as quickly as they can on themselves and their friends, and then whatever will get them reelected. And they think, honestly, that this will go on forever. But here's the problem. It can't. What is the biggest single, and I'm sure we're not the only state, I don't want to just bag on California, but what is the biggest single expense for the California state government?
I don't know.
It's pensions. They have a lot of retirees. And don't get me wrong, a lot of them are very nice people. One of my best friends saw him yesterday. He got a very nice government pension for a lifetime in California state service. You know, I certainly don't begrudge it them. But we need a certain amount of reality in this state. And probably in a lot of the other states. Not New York or New England, of course, where the property taxes ensure that young people will never be able to own anything of their own. They certainly don't need any doses of reality, but we do. So, I don't know.
Okay. Laramie Hirsch has 2 questions for you. First question. As a Catholic blogger on the alt-right, I have encountered many groups of people who are troubled about the many problems between different ethnicities and really the different cultures in the West. One solution many figures on the alt-right propose is white nationalism. In your opinion, what do you think will happen with the alt-right movement if they continue to promote white nationalism?
Well, there are several things in that question all at once.
Can you start with what exactly is the alt-right? This is a new term.
All right, so a new term for many. It certainly is a relatively new term for me.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that people my age and older have trouble understanding is that there's a whole cyber world out there. I made a little bit of a study of the alt-right and a semi-kindred movement, the neo-reactionaries. And these are kids, you know, ranging from their teens into their 20s, who are bright. You know, none of them are stupid people, you know, inherently stupid. They are the products of an educational system that gives them no context for anything. And one that tells them that anything you could possibly think that you're not allowed to think is evil. This is a very short-sighted way to deal with education. Because if you don't allow people to look at things, they will, and probably in uninformed ways that you won't like. So, the race issue is something that we studiously pretend doesn't exist unless a white man does something. And then, of course, it's because he's white. Now, I'm old enough to know the polite people don't notice that. The polite person says, "Oh, yes, I see," and goes about his business. The problem with these young people is that they haven't been trained in the ways of politeness, proper to my generation. And so they look and they say, hey, a black guy gets killed by a white policeman. Blacks riot, burn down their own neighborhood, and cause mayhem. And this isn't a problem. I think that's wrong. Again, if they were polite, as I am, as people my age are, they would understand that that's the way it is.
I've heard prominent people on the television, the talking heads, say they're just frustrated because they don't have a voice. And that's the only way that they can make their voice heard.
Well, as a columnist for a black magazine in Louisiana at the time of the '92 riots, I asked my readership a question which I will ask anybody who proposes that. How oppressed do I have to be before it's okay for me to burn your house? I'm willing to wager It doesn't matter if they are beating me senseless. You will never want me to burn your house down. Your house. I don't mean your people's house. I don't mean your neighborhood. When is it okay for me to burn your home? I'm willing to wager that most people would say they could shoot me dead, and it wouldn't be okay for my nephew to come and burn your house down. And again, I hate bringing reality into any question. In my family, we've always said reality is just a crutch for those who can't handle fantasy. And believe me, I'm with that. Absolutely. Top of the line. Nevertheless, in trying to understand these kids who are so misguided in thinking that they should believe someone yapping at them rather than their own eyes. So that's all on one side. Unfortunately, trying to do that to them has the opposite effect. It will make them, if it hasn't already, nasty, as blind to reality, to the subtleties of reality, as our masters are. I've been reproved, by the way, in speaking of our masters, our owners, and that kind of thing. To those who find those terms disturbing or upsetting, tough. Anyway, so the thing is that what they do not understand, and what, in a sense, some of them cannot understand, again, because of a lack of education, a lack of willingness to discuss these things openly and honestly, the issue is not one of race, but it's one of culture. And culture is determined primarily by what? Two things. Whatever goes into that culture, its raw ingredients, and the religion that binds that culture together. That's what makes one culture different from another. It's what makes one society different from another. Now, in looking at the racial issue in this country, because we're not allowed to explore it, to talk about it honestly, there are three things we're not allowed to say. One is that Reconstruction, after the Civil War, was the father of Jim Crow. Two, Jim Crow had a very stifling effect on the very nature, the very way in which slavery was ended in this country. Really, for want of a better phrase, messed things up tremendously. Reconstruction ensured that what was a difficult transition would be much worse. Jim Crow piled on top of it, made it far worse yet. And yet, under Jim Crow, men like George Washington Carver, like Booker T. Washington, built institutions, black institutions, that were the equal, very often, of anything the whites could do. And by the way, I'm not saying that made Jim Crow a good thing. Mm-hmm. You know, God may bring good out of evil, but that doesn't make the evil good.
Yeah,
it's just that's the way it is. And that you had black towns with black mayors and all that were not utterly corrupt, like so many towns of all colors are today. I mean, the great, one of my personal favorite writers, Zora Neale Hurston, who was a black writer in the early 20th century. Her father was the mayor of an all-black town in Florida, Eatonville. Very well-run joint. But what we've had happen since the Civil Rights Movement is the creation, for political reasons, for other reasons, of this horrible culture of entitlement, wherein any black who accomplishes anything is considered suspect by a lot of his fellow blacks. I mean, it's horrible.
All right, second question from Laramie Hirsch. In your book, Star Spangled Crown, you said that sovereigns have often presided over radically different and even hostile ethnicities, religions, and cultures. Could you list some examples of this? And how do you propose that an American monarch would best handle the racial dilemma in the United States?
Well, of course, the easy answer is read the book, but I won't give an easy answer. Well, yeah, I mean, where do I begin? Alexander, the Persian Empire, Alexander's Empire, the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Every empire that has ever existed, with a few exceptions like the American Empire, and some smaller countries like Rwanda and Ethiopia. Well, Ethiopia was an empire too. Anyway, the reason being that they were monarchical, and the monarch had to be above ethnicity, above race, to a degree above religion. And this will sound interesting because every monarchy is legitimized by a particular faith, not by several at once. And yet, nevertheless, they do have to maintain a connection. If they're people of other religions of their own, they do have to maintain some sort of connection with them. In Thailand, the king of Thailand is the head of the Buddhist community in Thailand, which is the largest mode of people. But he also maintains a set of Hindu priests at the court in Bangkok who perform certain particular Brahmin rituals for the monarchy. And he's the protector of the Christians. That's his particular title. Now, obviously, if, as was the case with Christianity vis-a-vis the Roman Empire, if the monarch feels that there's a irreconcilable difference between himself and a member of a faith, the members of that faith are going to feel it, the way we did.
Yeah.
But at any rate, generally speaking, there are so many examples of monarchs who have presided over this kind of diversity that the real question is, who are the ones who didn't? Which is a harder one to answer. You'll find very, very few, or even today, Belgium, for instance. I mean, the Flames and Walloons really dislike one another, even though they've got the same faith. But the monarchy and the church were the two great bonds of union in Belgium. And it's interesting that the country has begun to fragment as the faith has become far less prevalent among them, and as the monarchy has lost its influence over the workings of power. So that's that element of the question. How an American monarch would deal with it, presumably if such a person existed, the way any other monarch stuck with that kind of a setup would. He'd have to somehow be father of all the different races and peoples within the country, but on a very particular level. So in other words, where he might be, say I'm a citizen of California, and he's my king because he's the king of California. To the Indian reservation down the road, well, he is the supreme chief of all the tribes. And for the blacks, he might play some other role. That's why one of the interesting things about monarchies is the number of titles monarchs generally have. They're very often, they go on and on and on and on because they're not just the king or the emperor. They're different other things. They have a relationship with their different subjects according to those other offices. So that the thing is that the king would have to be, as it were, above the race issue.
How can he not play favorites? So, I mean, if you have people on two sides of an issue, you have to pick one side, don't you?
Not necessarily. I mean, you're presuming that somebody has to win. Somebody doesn't have to win.
Okay, well, how about pro-life versus pro-choice?
That's a different thing. That's not ethnicity. No. I mean, but it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to explore. It's the difference is this. Let's say you've got a father of a family. Now you wouldn't know this because you've got two brothers and a sister, so you have no experience. But pretend for a second that you've got a father with his family, and pretend that the siblings have very different personalities, very different interests, and very often have a lot of friction with each other. I know it's hard to believe, but
Yeah.
pretend that there was a family like that.
Okay.
There really is never any victory in this. The father always has to maintain his place. And the kids will always be doing the same stuff. When they're little boo-boo-woos to the big Thanksgiving dinner, when they're bringing all their children from all over the country to settle down with Dad, they do the same stuff, they fall into the same bloody roles. The father is stuck having to try to figure out, does he play favorites? Maybe, especially if one's stupider than another, or nastier. Yeah, he may play favorites in that sense, but it's not something that can be won.
I see.
The family is just the family as it is. And until all the members are dead, in which case it changes. The dynamic gets very different. But with a basic ideological question, that's totally different. And that becomes whether or not there's going to be a family at all. You couldn't have a family where, as I've described, you've got the difficult, problematic family, but they all accept that Dad's dad. And at the end of the day, he's going to lay down the law. And they may wheedle, they may try to get their way this way or that way, they may want this or that. All kinds of things may go on. They may lie to him, they may try to conceal things from him, they may rat each other out. All kinds of things can happen. But at the end of the day, there are certain basic rules. They're all stuck playing with them, whether they like them or not. Dad's dad. And Dad has his own personality issues.
Yeah.
He might be a drunk. He might be quick to punish and slow to question, or vice versa. They might be too indulgent. Anything might happen. But that's a particular structure. But if one of the kids says, I no longer recognize my sister as a member of this family, she's not real, that's a different problem. And what the abortion issue is really about is who's human and who isn't.
That's true.
Who's a member of the family and who isn't. The pro-abortion people are saying that the preborn are not members of the family.
Wow.
They're not real. They're not people. The sister of mine, she's not my sister. She's not real. She has no right to be here. And you, Dad, are wrong for calling her your daughter because she doesn't even exist. That's a whole other story. That's a whole other framework.
Wow.
And that's the difference between the two. A proper monarch would have the obligation to try to defend the unborn because they're subjects too.
Yeah.
Same as the elderly. Same as the productive, same as the unproductive.
Wow. Okay. Jeff Jorgensen and family from Cedar Rapids, Iowa writes, we have been thinking about the 1922 German silent film Nosferatu. What's your take on the movie? Is it a good movie, bad movie? Is it okay for Catholics to watch it?
Well, of course, within the parameters of 1920s German expressionist cinema. Oh, that's really not what is called for here, is it?
No.
No, all right. Well, firstly, let me say that I would not show it to 6-year-olds or 5-year-olds. But it's a good film. I mean, it's scary as all get out. More importantly, though, a comparison with Dracula is kind of useful. Because Nosferatu is evil. But he's realistic evil. Evil as it actually is. Dracula is evil as it makes itself appear to us. If you like, Dracula is the sin when we're tempted.
Ah.
Nosferatu is the sin when we have done it. And we've got this horrible thing. And that's where we go running to confession, because we want this long, fingernailed, baldy, white, hideous, grub-like thing away from us.
Yeah.
We don't want him hanging around. When he was all nicely dressed like Dracula, then he was okay.
Yeah.
Then it was fun. Now, not so much. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great picture if you like that kind of thing. I'm a great believer that those who don't like certain kinds of films probably shouldn't see them.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, if horror films aren't your thing, don't see it, for heaven's sake. If you enjoy horror films, that's fine. But try to see really good ones that have a moral center. Nosferatu has a moral center. So does Dracula. The problem with horror films comes when they lose that moral center.
Ah.
When, as in so many of the new vampire films, crosses don't work.
Yeah. I mean.
There's no good, there's no evil.
Yeah.
Nihilistic horror I've got no use for. And, forget about chop mops.
Like Saw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course you've heard they're coming up with a more family friendly version of Saw.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it's called Spoon. It's not quite as graphic.
Wow.
You see, of course, it does feature a lot of very frustrated people just sort of lying around.
Wow.
Anyway, so I hope that that's of some.
Yeah.
Some help. I mean, one of the things I think we do have to bear in mind is that not everything's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, some things are, should I read The Exorcist or not? Others are, should I read Reader's Digest or not? All right, we do have to bear this in mind.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm all in favor of people reading Reader's Digest if they want to.
Oh, good.
All right.
Okay, so last question. How was your Thanksgiving?
How was my Thanksgiving? Well, that's a good question. Thanksgiving, of course, is our annual celebration of the Puritan remembrance. I'll have you know that earlier in November I was at Plymouth Rock, though I didn't expect to be there, but I was.
Wow.
I worshipped the memory of the Pilgrims. They were wonderful turkeys or whatever it was. No, seriously, I have to tell you the truth. Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, is a holiday I've always been a little bit problematic with. Not that I'm against the idea of giving thanks for what we get, not at all. But the whole Puritan pilgrim thing leaves me kind of cold.
Oh.
Canadian Thanksgiving, which happens a month earlier, I really like, because that's just a harvest thing. Giving thanks for the bountiful harvest.
Oh, okay.
It's a month earlier because Canada's harvest is a month earlier than ours since they're so far north. But the way I have observed Thanksgiving for many years is that I don't go anywhere. I eat turkey that I've prepared beforehand, and stuffing and gravy, and I drink champagne and watch old black and white films, like Nosferatu.
Oh.
Although, and Dracula.
On Thanksgiving?
Oh, yes. I have my family film fest, only it's more for the Manson family, I guess. But, no, I not just that. I mean, I'll start out very light, with musicals.
Oh, yeah.
Like Broadway Melody of 1938, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then get a little bit more, go into comedies, and then mysteries,
Mm-hmm.
and then with horror and or science fiction.
Wow.
That's the arc of the day. So usually I go through 4 or 5 films.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, it is. But this year I couldn't do that.
Oh.
Because, I have both a cousin and a nephew who live with me. And both of them had Halloween plans. Thanksgiving plans, I meant to say. You see, this happens. You notice we just did the Halloween show.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yep.
and now we're after Thanksgiving. So we're going to do the Valentine's show, I think, it was an hour. Anyway, that's one of the beauties, ladies and gentlemen, of middle age, is that the calendar zips by. Anyway, so we rustled up some turkey and stuffing and champagne and had a bit of a Thanksgiving meal together, which was fun. Didn't see all the old movies I would have seen, of course. Didn't even see the Twilight Zone Marathon, which was put on by some civic-minded television program. Television station. I think Twilight Zone really was the best preparation I could have had for the world I live in.
I believe it.
I thank God that we were a Twilight Zone family, because it helped us understand. To this day in my family, if somebody drops somebody, their friendship is over. He's wished them in the cornfield. It's a direct Twilight Zone reference. Anyway. No, so it was a pleasant Thanksgiving, and I have to say that, we're getting toward the end of the year. We're just closed out the month of the Holy Souls. This is a time for, even if you don't like the Puritans, it's a time for reflection and thought. gratitude, really. Because, ladies and gentlemen, despite the many annoying things that we have to deal with on this show, that's still a wonderful old world. A lot of really neat stuff in it. And that's something, as the season of Advent goes on, and I hope we're being more penitential than most. The rule of thumb, gang, when you see purple on the priest, it means you should be doing something, fasting or something. But Christmas is coming. And that's the one time of the year when, despite itself, all of society, one way or the other, has to acknowledge the birth of our Lord. And they may not like it, and they may say happy holiday, and they may whine. You have these moronic people ripping down the lights in Chicago for the Christmas tree. I sure hope they get at the very least, get coal in their stockings on Christmas. But the people, whoever we are, we have to deal with the birth of Christ. We can ignore his resurrection on Easter. We can ignore Pentecost. We can ignore all that. But nobody can escape Christmas. Of course, even I, much as I love Christmas, after a month of hearing nothing but easy listening secular Christmas songs on the radio, that does get tough.
Yeah.
I'll admit it. But anyway, may I wish all of our friends out in television land a very wretched Advent. But be sure to keep the feasts that pop up, like St. Nicholas's Day. And this has been a very interesting episode.
Yes, it has. Okay. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please subscribe to the Tumblr House YouTube channel. If you want to send Charles a question to be asked on the show, you can do so through the Tumblr House website. We'll see you again next time.
And bear in mind, when we say episode, people do have their episodes. So,
Yep.
be warned.